So let me start. I'll start with Lenin. At the outbreak of World War I in 1914, Lenin was shocked. He was shocked that the international social democracy had adopted the patriotic line and consigned their respective workers to the slaughter. This was Lenin's moment of truth. In order to confront this new, open situation, Lenin picked up the sharpest weapon he could find: Hegel's Science of Logic. If anyone has picked it up, it's definitely a weapon. You could kill somebody if you slung it at them. But he went into seclusion to analyze this book. He went into isolation. And he subsequently reinvented Marxism, articulated in his State and Revolution. And he successfully led Russian social democracy out of the impasse. In State and Revolution, Lenin broke with everything the left had meant up to that point. He broke with it. When, in his April thesis in 1917, Lenin saw the unique chance for a revolution, his proposals were met with contempt by the large majority of the party. Pravda dissociated the party and the editorial board from them. Bogdanov said they were the delirium of a madman, and Lenin's wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya, concluded, "I am afraid it looks as if Lenin has gone crazy." Let's move on to Marx. 60 years earlier, Karl Marx also had Hegel's Science of Logic as a constant companion on his desk when he was working on his contribution to the critique of political economy. In Das Kapital, Marx defines the concept of value in general as purely ideal, not on the grounds that it exists only in the consciousness, only in the head of the commodity owner, but on quite opposite grounds. In the chapter on money, we read that the price or money form of value, like any form of value in general, is ideal because it is totally distinct from the palpable, corporal form of the commodity in which it is presented. In other words, the form of value is ideal, although it exists outside of human consciousness and independently of it. In this analysis, has Marx suddenly jumped into the objective idealist camp of Hegel? Well, yes, actually. Marx's commodity fetish is none other than the spirit of value appearing in the commodity. However, in Marx's view, ideality is a characteristic of the materially established images of human social culture, which confront the individual possessing consciousness and will as a special, supernatural objective reality, as a special object comparable with material reality and situated in one and the same spatial plane, and hence is often identified with it. If we, as Marxists, do not have a firm understanding of this essential ideal nature of value and surplus value, we will fail to provide a proper analysis of the current crisis. So let me try. This is my stab at Marx's economics with this. So Karl Marx showed that the simple exchange of commodities for money that in turn bought other commodities, so this is the so-called CMC relation, could not generate surplus value or profit. It was only when money was exchanged for the commodity with the intention of selling, hopefully for more money, that the relation MCM prime, that a surplus value, delta M, my first mathematical symbol and only mathematical symbol of the day, it's the change in M prime is M prime minus M. So this is the term I'm going to use for surplus value. Marx uses it in his work as well. Industrial capital dreams of the ultimate free lunch. Industrial capital would love for money to create money without this thing in between. Financial capital achieves that. They can make money out of money without this. But for the minute, let's take industrial capital for illustration. Okay, because everything is contained in this. Stephen Jay Gould, he's a scientist, a popularizer of science. He wrote a famous essay about 20 years ago, I think, in which he traced the relationship between the weight and price of Hershey chocolate bars over the past half century. Hershey is like the Cadbury dynasty. They're a big American chocolate dynasty. The company gradually reduced the weight of the product and then made it larger again, though not as large as it was originally, and raised the price, and then gradually diminished it, and so on. If we push this tendency to its conclusion, at some point that can be exactly calculated, the company will be selling a package with nothing in it, at a price that can be precisely determined. This is Hershey's free lunch. So we need to rewrite Marx's equation slightly differently than he's done it. We need to break it down into surplus value, has a free lunch portion, and it has a real commodity portion. The free lunch portion of surplus value is the price we pay for the logo, for nothing. Much more importantly, the free lunch portion of surplus value contained in the price of the commodity is an unearned income. This portion of surplus value is socially generated and arises from the present level of culture in our society as it has evolved since humanity's emergence. Let us pause to explain that. Culture is a joint undertaking between the individual and society. The symphonies of Mozart, like the songs of Lennon and McCartney, are creative works of genius, but they also arise from the culture in which that genius lives. The instrumentation, the notation system, and the prevalent musical forms are the dough from which the composers make their cakes. The same applies to ideas. All thinkers, scientists, and writers draw on the stories and discoveries that have been developed by countless men and women before them. In this way, all new work draws from the common heritage and then in turn enriches it. Today, unfortunately, this cultural commons, like the commons of nature and community, is being enclosed by private corporations, and these corporations are depleting the very soil in which culture grows and are eroding the very fragile veneer of our humanity. Commonwealth is like the dark matter of the economic universe. It's everywhere, but we don't see it. Who can stop the air, an aquifer, or the social trust that underlies our social institutions? Marxists tend to be blindsided by this portion of surplus value. And yet, it turns out that it is this free lunch portion that gives rise to Marx's commodity fetish. The real commodity portion of surplus value, as Marx and all his predecessors exhaustively explained by the labour theory of value, is due to the specific labour power embodied in the commodity. And since nobody will purchase an empty chocolate wrapper, industrial capital must retain some semblance of a commodity in order to obtain its free lunch. Yet it does everything to maximize this free lunch portion. Let's look at a modern example. This is the 64 gigabit iPod Touch. It retails for about $400. Of this, only $13 is accounted for by the labour of the workers at the Chinese firm Foxconn, as wages in China are around the 20th or less of what they would be in the United States. There is a large outlay on the development of software programs and new technology, but this cost is spread over a large number of units, so it constitutes a small fraction of the final cost. The vast bulk of the surplus value does not go to the manufacturer. It is extracted as rent by the parent company, Apple, and those involved in protecting its brand. So in Apple's case, the free lunch portion, the rent, is 90%. Us. That's us. That's sucking our lifeblood out of us. 10% is the real commodity portion. This is a very different mode of profit accumulation from that investigated by Marx, or indeed that developed by the likes of Henry Ford, where the real commodity portion tended more towards 100%. I think that's the end of my slideshow. Marx's failure to clearly enunciate these different components of surplus value results in a disastrous workerist fetish within Marxism, which must be redressed today. The private appropriation of our very human essence contained in the free lunch portion of surplus value means that we must restore the concept of substanceless subjectivity, or proletarian, to our enterprise. Financialization, in which all surplus value is extracted as a free lunch, means that today that all people in odious negative equity debt now form the constituency for the Marxist project. Waiting for the workers to revolt, we might as well be waiting for Godot. What magic did this book, The Science of Logic, contain that it was so essential in helping to spearhead the defence of ordinary people, workers and peasants, from the onslaught of capital and the havoc and destruction it was wreaking across the world? Can we use it again today? Or have we anything sharper in our armoury that can help us slay the dragon of capital for once and for all? So looking at Science of Logic today, one is struck by the mathematical nature of much of its content. One-eighth of the book is concerned with the mathematics of the infinitesimal calculus alone, covering strange topics like bad and good infinity, Zeno's paradoxes of motion, the infinitesimal calculus. Hegel anticipates in words many of the issues relating to infinity that have only been resolved in 20th century mathematics. Unfortunately, using words and not the tools of an as yet inadequate mathematics, Hegel's presentation is very obscure and obfuscating. Well, always was, but certainly to the modern reader. Fortunately today, we have Alain Badiou's Being and Event, which is a modern reworking of Hegel's Science of Logic in terms of the latest development in modern set theory, in which he can claim that mathematics is ontology, and that following Russell's paradox, the one is not. These are his famous claims. On top of this, we have his Logics of Worlds, which is a reworking of Hegel's Phenomenology of Mind, incorporating the advances of 20th century mathematical logic in this case. Badio maintains that a decisive break was made in the latter part of the 19th century with Cantor's creation of a method for handling infinite sets. For Badio, it is Cantor who puts the mathematical seal on the post-Galilean view of the universe. The religious conception of a finite created world depending on an incomprehensibly infinite being is replaced by a universe in which the infinite has become actualized. Badio, now this is important for this group, Badio identifies the state with the set of the subsets of a set, the so-called power set. This identification enables him to categorically assert the necessity for universalist emancipatory politics to maintain its distance from the state in order not to repeat the failures and disasters of the Marxism of the 20th century. This assertion is particularly worthy of examination by the current heirs of Lenin, Trotsky, and Mao. Logics of Worlds. In Logics of Worlds, Badio describes the emergence and re-emergence of truths through the ages, using examples of mathematical and political truths. For instance, as Marxists, we have no problem with the truth of the assertion, man is born free. Do we? Anybody? We include. Yet nowhere in this world is this assertion an actual fact. It has been in the interrogation of the gap between the facts and this truth that movements for universal human emancipation have emerged and been suppressed throughout the ages. The slave revolt of Spartacus in 73 BC Italy was an event in the ancient world which originates the maxim of emancipation. It was finally annihilated in the name of the city by the crucifixion of thousands of slaves and the displaying of their bodies along the side of the road, thereby reducing it to a practical oblivion for many centuries. Had the maxim of emancipation thereby disappeared for good? Can a truth, as eternal as it may be, being created in history, slip back into nothingness? No. The first victorious slave revolt, led by Toussaint Louverture in the western part of Santo Domingo, now Haiti, in 1791, made the principle of the abolition of slavery real. It conferred on blacks the status of citizen and, in the context of the French Revolution, created the first state led by former black slaves. In April 1796, the governor, Laveux, called Toussaint Louverture to his side, named him deputy governor, and called him the Black Spartacus. In the name of empire, this revolt was in its turn annihilated by the combined forces of British and French imperialism, to the extent that even Marx seems to be unaware of it, as it is not mentioned in any of his works. Yet this event definitely informed Hegel's master-slave dialectic, which is, after all, the basis of Marxist politics. In 1919, the communist insurgents of Berlin, led by Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, called themselves Spartacists, thereby negating the forgetting of the slave insurrection and restoring its emancipatory maxim in the form, proletarians of the world unite. In the name of nation, today we hear it in the national interest, the sordid annihilation by assassination of the two leaders by the shock troops of the Social Democratic minister Gustav Noske, Luxemburg was battered with rifle butts and her body was thrown into the canal. Liebknecht was shot and his body dumped into a morgue. Echoed the thousands crucified in the name of city on the Roman roads 2,000 years previously. and surely foreshadowed the much more widespread sordid annihilations under National Socialism 2 decades later. So, following with mathematical certainty the logic of appearing in a world, the truth maxim, man is born free, and the militant of that truth, whose name is Spartacus, travelled from world to world through the centuries. Ancient Spartacus, Black Spartacus, Red Spartacus. So in conclusion, Marxism is the negation of objective idealism, but in the Hegelian sense of sublation. It's simultaneous abolition and preservation. Marx did not make a once and for all break with Hegel, but continuously returned to him to negate his idealism, as did Lenin and Trotsky after him. To prevent ossification, Marxists today must think anew. We must repeat the Leninist gesture of 1914 and reinvent Marxism to our new circumstances today. We must break with everything the left has meant for 200 years and still preserve it. We do this by incorporating the latest development in mathematics and the natural sciences to ensure that the next resurrection of Spartacus is successful. Thank you. My title comes from this little book. It's Flatland, a Romance in Many Directions. It was written by a Victorian clergyman, and it's populated by geometrical figures that experienced a universal emancipatory movement called the Chromatic sedition, which of course was brutally suppressed. The book is used as an introduction to Einstein's relativity. I recommend it to any budding Marxist. In fact, I recommend it to any hardened Marxist. A square, when he encounters a sphere from a totally different dimension, gives a useful example of Hegel's interpretation of the logic of appearing in a world. So I recommend it. Maybe the Marxist reading group might take it on as their next project. Thanks very much.